almost every advanced computer chip on the planet is made in the same place. One island, a handful of buildings, a little over 100 miles off the coast of China, the chip inside your phone, the processors training every AI you've ever heard of, the silicon inside fighter jets and hospital scanners, nearly all of it is born in those few buildings. And China has spent more than 70 years insisting it will one day take that island back, by force, if it comes to that. So this whole video really comes down to one question. What actually happens to your world the day that island goes dark? Start with the thing in your pocket. The company that makes those chips is called TSMC, and if it went offline, your next phone would simply never get made, because TSMC builds every processor Apple ships. NVIDIA's chips, the ones the entire AI boom runs on, come out of those same buildings, so the supply of new AI hardware would dry up almost overnight. Modern cars, which need hundreds of chips just to start, would pile up half-finished on the line, the way they did during the shortage a few years ago, only far worse. And the race to build smarter AI, the thing every tech giant is pouring billions into, would stall completely, because you can't train a bigger model without the latest chips, and the latest chips would have stopped existing. Worst of all, nobody could simply step in and take over, because there is no second TSMC. Building one takes decades, and we'll get to exactly why in a minute. This one company is now the most valuable in all of Asia, worth more than $2 trillion, and a single point of failure for the entire modern world. So, how did one company, on one island, end up making the most important product in the modern economy? It comes down to one man, and a strange decision he made almost 40 years ago. His name is Morris Chang, and before he founded TSMC, he spent 25 years working at an American company you have absolutely heard of. Texas Instruments? Yes, that Texas Instruments. The company that made the chunky gray graphing calculator your school forced you to buy. And if you were anything like me, you mostly used it to play games you'd secretly loaded onto it instead of doing the math it was meant for. Chang didn't run the calculator side. He ran their semiconductors division, and he was good enough at it that he expected, one day, to run the whole company. He didn't get the job, so in 1985, at an age when most people are thinking about retirement, he accepted an invitation from the government of Taiwan to come and build a chip industry out of almost nothing. And in 1987, Chang did something nobody had done before. Every chip company up to that point designed its own chips and built them in its own factories. Chang built a factory that designed nothing at all. TSMC would manufacture other companies' chips and compete with none of them. It sounds almost boring, but it was quietly one of the most important ideas in the history of computing, because it meant that a startup with a brilliant chip design and no factory of its own could suddenly exist. Companies like NVIDIA owe their entire existence to it. Chang didn't just join the chip industry. He created the conditions for half of it to be born. That one decision created a machine that feeds itself. Once everyone designs their chips and lets TSMC build them, TSMC gets all the volume, which means more money for research than any rival can match, which means it pulls further ahead every year, which means everyone has to depend on it even more. 40 years of that loop have left TSMC building chips nobody else on Earth can come close to matching, and almost all of that work happens in just 3 clusters of buildings on the west coast of Taiwan. The most advanced site of all, a single complex in the south called Fab 18, produces the 3-nanometer chips that sit at the absolute cutting edge of the entire world. And to make those chips, TSMC depends on the single most complex machine humanity has ever built, an extreme ultraviolet system that only one company in the entire world, a Dutch firm called ASML, knows how to make. TSMC is by far its biggest customer, and it runs more of those machines than anyone else alive. So the supply chain of the modern world comes down to this. One company in the Netherlands builds the machine, one company in Taiwan runs more of them than anyone on a single island. And almost everything you own with a chip inside it comes out the other end. Now for the part that keeps generals awake at night. Taiwan is not just any island. It's an island that China considers a breakaway province, and the Chinese government has never once promised to take it back peacefully. In 2022, standing in front of his ruling party, Xi Jinping said, in his own words, that China would never promise to renounce the use of force, and that it reserved the option of taking all measures necessary. The room applauded. You've probably heard a specific year attached to all of this, 2027, and it's worth being careful about where that number came from. Back in 2021, a senior American admiral told the US Senate that China could be ready to move on Taiwan within the next 6 years, which pointed at 2027. But that was an assessment of military readiness, not a prediction that an invasion is locked in for that date. And US intelligence has since said China has set no fixed timetable at all. So the honest version isn't that war is certain. It's that the most dangerous military flashpoint on the planet sits directly on top of that one factory. And if it ever goes off, the cost is almost beyond imagining. Bloomberg Economics modeled a war over Taiwan and estimated it would cost the world around $10 trillion in the first year alone, close to 10% of the entire global economy, a blow far bigger than the pandemic or the 2008 financial crash. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn, into an idea that gets repeated everywhere and almost always gets mangled. The idea is that if China ever invaded, the West might destroy TSMC's factories rather than let them fall into Chinese hands. You'll see this stated online as though it's official American policy. It isn't, and the real story is actually three separate things that keep getting fused into one. The first is a proposal. In 2021, a paper published in a US Army War College journal argued that Taiwan should make itself, in the author's words, an unwantable prize, including a credible threat to render TSMC's factories useless. That was an academic argument, not a government plan. The second is loose talk. A handful of American figures, a former national security advisor and a congressman among them, have publicly floated the idea that the United States should be willing to deny those factories to China, with one of them using the phrase blow up TSMC, which he later said was taken out of context. Those were individual remarks at conferences, not policy. And the third is the most unsettling of all because it came from inside TSMC. In 2022, the company's own chairman said that if China invaded, it almost wouldn't matter because the factories would simply stop working. They're so complex and so dependent on a constant connection to suppliers and engineers all over the world that the moment that connection is cut, the machines become, in his word, non-operable. Nobody, he said, can control TSMC by force. So there's no secret plan to bomb Taiwan's factories. There's something stranger, a factory so advanced that conquering it could destroy the very thing you came to take. So is anyone actually trying to fix this? They are, but none of it is ready in time, and it won't be for years. The United States has seen the danger. It passed a law called the CHIPS Act, steering more than $50 billion toward building chip factories on American soil, and TSMC itself is now spending around $165 billion on a cluster of fabs in the Arizona desert, the largest foreign investment in American history. But those Arizona factories are running a generation or two behind the ones back home, so the most advanced chips in the world will still be made in Taiwan for years to come. And the other escape route, China simply building its own TSMC, keeps slamming into the same wall we hit last episode. China's biggest chip maker is stuck several years behind, unable to make the cutting-edge ones, for one reason above all others. It can't get its hands on ASML's machine. The export ban that began as a story about one Dutch company is the reason the whole world is still trapped on one Taiwanese island. In December of 2022, Morris Chang, by then 91 years old, stood in that Arizona desert at the opening of his company's first major American factory. The President of the United States was standing right beside him, and the man who had spent his life building a borderless global supply chain, the most successful version of it ever created, used the moment to deliver something close to a eulogy. Globalization, he said, is almost dead. Free trade is almost dead. A lot of people still wish they would come back, but he didn't think they ever would. He would know. Chang spent his whole life proving that the world could specialize, that the most complex thing humanity makes could be built brilliantly in one place and shared with everyone. TSMC is the ultimate proof that it works. It's also now the biggest reason it could all come apart. And the unsettling truth is that nobody actually knows what happens if that arrangement is ever tested. We're all just quietly hoping it never is. But chips are only half of the machine, because a chip, no matter how advanced, is a useless sliver of sand without one more thing, and the race to lock up that one thing is already reopening nuclear power stations and quietly pushing the electricity grid you rely on toward its breaking point. Next time, the hidden war over the power that makes all of this run.